Okay, today is February 5th, 2023. My name's Jonathan Hager, and this is my Coming to the Path talk. So, Truman first approached me to give this talk the year before the pandemic, the before times. And I was in the midst of a suicidal depression at that point. I didn't think it was a good time to give the talk. More on that later. So I said no. And then he approached me this past fall, and I said yes. And then I got COVID. And some of you may have seen, I was scheduled for the talk a couple months ago, and wasn't over COVID yet, so it got canceled again. But Truman persisted. Despite all the signs of the universe telling him I shouldn't give this talk, here I am. So, when I was thinking about coming to the path, for me, the title of my talk is a little bit more coming to the path and staying on the path. So I'm going to talk not just about how I got here, because it's a relatively short story, but a little bit about my time here, my struggles with the practice, my wanting to leave the practice, not leaving the practice. Some of that stuff. I know the in thing on college campuses these days is trigger warnings on books and lectures. So here's my trigger warning. There's going to be a lot of talk about anxiety, depression, cancer, suicidal thoughts, the death of a young baby. I'll probably cry. I might need a hug at the end. But it's also going to be a talk not just about all those struggles, but about resilience and hope, courage, and healing. A lot of healing. I hope I don't babble too much. My personality tendency is to plan. I especially noticed this in the last session, that how much I pre-rehearse conversations that I'm going to have with people. I doubt I'm the only one that does that. So in an effort not to go down that rabbit hole, I didn't plan this talk too carefully. So we'll see what happens. So we'll start at the beginning. My birth was a little traumatic. Yeah, I was an emergency C-section because the cord was wrapped around my neck, as I've spent the last 10 years, staring at a wall, investigating myself, and wondering, why do I have so much anxiety? It kind of came to me like, well, maybe because I almost died when I was a baby, that imprinted on me in a way. Who knows? And then I listened to Desiree's talk recently as for inspiration for mine, and she talked about how she talked with her parents before hers. So I called up my parents and said, what was I like as a kid, and let's talk a little bit more. And my mother also told me that she thought I was a near SIDS death. She's convinced. She walked into my crib one time, and I didn't know the story until 2 days ago, that she walked into my crib one time and I was limp, flaccid, and not responsive. And she's convinced if she hadn't been there at that moment that I might not be here giving this talk. So I don't know. Those are just curiosities in my brain. But I asked my mom and dad, to give kind of one word of their memory of me as a youngish child under 5, 10, and they said easygoing. And I said, do you have the right kid? Interesting how our parents' perceptions and our own perceptions can be so different. I think they felt that I was easygoing because I was obedient. And that's another theme that's going to come up during my talk and my Zen practice. I was always the good kid. I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't rebellious. My my big moment of rebellion, if you can call it that, in high school was my parents were out of town for the weekend, and left their teenage college kid or teenage high school kid home alone, which is never a good thing to do. But and I we had the classic Deadhead Volkswagen camper. This was back in the early '80s, and my rebellion was getting as many friends as we could packed into that camper with a keg of beer, driving around the suburbs of Cincinnati from party to party. I can only imagine if I had gotten pulled over. I wasn't drinking, but still, 10 under 21-year-olds in a car with a keg is not a good thing. But that was the extent of my rebellion. I was very anxious. I had a lot of social phobia, still do. This talk is not easy for me. We moved around a lot. I lived in Baltimore until I was about 7 or 8, and we moved to Florida, and I was there through freshman year of high school, so I had to move again in the middle of high school, which is also not fun. Losing friends, trying to make new friends, especially if you're anxious and socially phobic, those kind of changes are not fun. And so I was in Cincinnati for just 3 years for high school, and then I went off to college in Philadelphia. I was a high achiever. Like I said, I was obedient. I got good grades. I didn't get in trouble. Never got in trouble. Part of that was the fact that my father was the assistant principal at our school. So that was another kind of awkward thing, being the kid of the assistant principal. And when he moved schools, he was a regular teacher. And so it was always, I avoided him like the plague. I managed never to take classes from him. My sister took classes from him, but I didn't. The rest of my upbringing was pretty unremarkable. I mean, we had a middle class upbringing. My dad was a teacher. My mom's a nurse. We didn't have lots of money, but we had enough. We had some driving around vacations. I never got on a plane until the end of high school. But yeah, seemingly other than that cord wrapped around my neck as a baby, no major traumas that I was ever aware of. And yet there was always this anxiety and social phobia. And low self-esteem was a huge part of all of this. And I'm sure that was a driver for the studying and the good grades and trying to please people, being a people pleaser. And this would persist for a long time. Off to medical school. Again, high achiever in medical school. Didn't help. Low self-esteem still there. My religious upbringing was Episcopalian. So my father is Episcopalian. My mother is Catholic. Some people see only a slight difference between those. Mother really lapsed Catholic. She was pretty anti-religion. She spent some time with the Unitarians, so maybe that was a big influence on me. I remember going there as well. I would go sometimes with my mother to the Unitarian church and sometimes with my father to the Episcopal church. I had sort of a mixed feeling about church growing up. Most 12 and 13-year-olds don't really want to be in church. But I did like the aura, the ambiance. My father, still to this day, sort of gets into some old man rants about modern churches, and he loves the old classic cathedrals, and I do too. I still walk into, now having been to Europe and been to some amazing cathedrals, I walk into these places and I just have a feeling of awe and safety and comfort. But I was bored in church a lot. But I was an altar boy until middle school in the choir, but then high school kind of dropped off. And that's when, the doubts about God, which many people here have gone through, started, filtering in, that things just didn't make sense to me. The suffering just didn't make sense. I couldn't accept the explanations that I was given in church. So I faded away from it. College, this got worse. I took some philosophy classes. Again, looking for those answers that a lot of us come here for. And philosophy classes, raise more questions than they do answers. And you just spend a lot of time thinking. So it's interesting, that we end up here. My first exposure to Buddhism was in a Buddhist philosophy class in college. I don't remember now why I picked it. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I don't remember a lot about the class other than that the professor was really like this gorgeous Indian man with flowing hair and very expensive suits. We thought he just kind of floated around the room. And there was a cute girl in there that I liked a lot too, so that was part of the reason I think I liked the class. But my big paper, the final exam paper for that class was on biology and Buddhism. And I've wondered looked many times. We moved around so much that the paper got lost, and I would love to be able to find that paper now, because I don't have any recollection of what I wrote it about. But I was looking in both realms essentially for understanding. Academically, I was always a math science kid. I'm a very linear thinker. A goes to B goes to C. And I hated poetry. Oh boy, I just could not do poetry. So yeah, I was looking for answers in science, and it made sense. Geometry, just made so much sense. And then, as I got to higher level math, then things got confusing again. That hit the limits of my innate intelligence. Same thing with physics. Biology, seemed to make more sense, or at least I believed that it made sense. And part of what's been fantastic about this journey is I've circled back to realizing that they don't have a clue. That this illusion of knowledge, that I bought into for years, that science was going to answer all of this for me. You could explain it all with just the right mix of protons and electrons and neutrons. So that's why I wrote this paper in biology and Buddhism. I was trying to synthesize these two things to get understanding. But of course I didn't get it, that understanding. And as we know, there's many theoretical physicists who are still searching. And that's what we're here doing, just in a very different way than I used to do. So throughout college, I went from doubting God to agnostic to, I remember the first time I said, I'm an atheist. I'm going to just, put my foot down and say it. I was just, instead of hedging my bets and, wanting to be on both sides of the fence in case I was wrong. I didn't want to leave that God and just in case, But I finally did it. I finally said it, I don't think I ever got as militant as, was it Dawkins? He's the guy, right? I know I read his book, but I don't think I ever quite got that militant, but and then you go to medical school and you just don't have time for any of this stuff, right? I mean, it's just thinking about, even though we spend our whole day dealing with life and death, you're not thinking about it in those terms. So yeah, you're incredibly busy. You put these things to the side. First day of medical school, I met my future wife. I fell in love that first year of medical school. So you're in love and you're trying to study. It's good luck with that. But yeah, so all these existential things got put on the back burner, except for the understanding part. Wanting to understand. Obviously, there's tons of explanations in medical school, and I always admire the PhDs because they're immersed in the questions. Even though they're looking for answers, medical school, you're kind of taking the shortcut and somebody's giving you the answers. We do a lot of memorization. There's a lot of thinking too, but not the kind of thinking that a PhD scientist or PhD of any kind is doing. I didn't really have the patience to be a researcher. I've developed much more of that with 10 years of this practice. Searching. So yeah, finished medical school. Wife and I decided to settle down in Rochester, do our residency here. Start having kids about a year after residency ends, so you're starting to practice. Two young doctors, both career people, young kids. We tried to limit our schedules, keep it from being too crazy, kind of working 3/4 time. It's busy. And so yeah, again, not really spending a lot of time. The religion popped into my head again when we had kids. I'm thinking, well, I got to do something here. I'm responsible now for the development of two beautiful daughters. So I started going back, taking them a little bit to a couple different churches around town, seeing if I could re-enter. Even if I still didn't really believe in the God thing, there was a lot of benefits to churches. Even if you don't believe in the God thing, there's a lot of great messaging, great community, just the atmosphere, that feeling of being in a sacred space was never left me. It just popped into my head. The one of the most sacred spaces I ever had church service in was in the woods of North Carolina. My parents sent me to a sleepaway camp when I was about 10 or 11. And it's funny, I have a handful of memories from this camp because it was extremely traumatic. I was horribly, horribly homesick. I did not want to be there. But I had fun doing the sports and archery and these things, and it was, looking back on it now, I know that there was a religious basis to the camp. Because they took us to church every Sunday. We had a church service, and they'd carved out a little set of pews in the woods. So we were, if you can imagine, there's just benches like a normal church would have, flat benches carved out of trees, nothing formal, and trees arching over you. It's in the mountains of North Carolina. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, that atmosphere, has always been with me. So yeah, revisited it with the birth of when the kids got a little bit older and start taking them a little bit. But my wife is totally non-religious, so there wasn't really a lot of interest on her part in pursuing this with our kids, and kind of faded out a bit. So we were living our lives, working and taking care of the kids. And 2009, I woke up in the middle of the night with the worst pain I've ever had. It was like somebody was stabbing me with a knife in my rib cage, my right side of my ribs by my liver. And I couldn't do anything. No position was comfortable. I had to sit absolutely still, or it would be like somebody stabbed me with a knife. I couldn't even breathe. I just did these teeny tiny breaths because it hurt so much to take a breath. And I ended up in the emergency room, and they scanned me and blood tests and no real explanation, and went away. A few months later, it came back. No real explanation, and being the just push personality that I was, and just get through, go on. I just moved on, didn't really pay much attention because I seemed to be pretty okay in between the episodes. I was tired in between the episodes. They'd last a few days. Nobody could really, I didn't get good explanations from the doctors I went to. And, I started laying down when I would come home from work, and I just said, oh, that's normal. You're working hard. You got 2 kids. Only in retrospect, do I know that wasn't normal. So this goes on for almost 2 years. I go back and forth for a variety of tests, and no answers. But I'm getting worse, and when I think back at the powerful level of denial or something that goes on in the human psyche, because I was a very competitive squash player. I was playing in national tournaments, and the last tournament I played in before the big day was in New York City, and you play 4 or 5 matches over the course of a weekend. So you play in the morning, you have a break, you play again in the afternoon. And I remember I was laying down on a couch trying to get some rest in between my matches because I was so tired. And yet I kept playing. That stubbornness might help me along the way, I suppose, with my Zen practice, but I think it has. So finally, I went to the doctor. Like, we got to do something. They concluded I was probably having some kind of spasms of my gallbladder that was irritating my diaphragm and causing these pains. And so I went to a good friend who's a surgeon. Okay, take your gallbladder out, June 11th, whatever day it was. So I go in, routine gallbladder surgery, in and out. You go in, you're going to go home the same day. And I wake up in the recovery room with my wife, tears pouring out of her. Telling me that I had a liver full of cancer. And of course, being a doctor, I know of no disease, no cancer, that you have a dozen tumors in your liver that is not uniformly fatal. So that's the short answer of how I got to Zen right there. Fortunately, fortunately there was stuff I didn't know. And stuff that most oncologists don't know. The first week or 10 days, of course, were, more than that was pure hell. But the first 10 days, especially, because, we were just, what kind of cancer is this? They couldn't tell me. They thought a gallbladder cancer, liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, None of those are good. And fortunately, there was a very smart pathologist, who I don't even know the person's name now that I think about it, who determined I had this exceptionally rare type of sarcoma. Sarcomas are cancers of like the connecting tissues. So, even though the tumors are in the liver, it's not, the liver cells are not cancerous. It's the blood vessel in my liver that has the cancer. And so, we get this diagnosis and I go on the internet and, okay, well, average life expectancy is 5 years. Okay, well, that's better than what I thought. And so now I start the search, right? Because no one at University of Rochester had ever seen this cancer before. It's so rare. Roswell, nobody in Buffalo at Roswell had ever seen it before. So I'm going all over the country. I'm fortunate. I had the resources and the ability to get all the top-notch medical care. Go to Boston, go to Pittsburgh. And the part of this story that I think is, really relevant for me and Zen practice, not just, of course, the existential trauma, which is obvious, but for me, this was about self-discovery, self-agency, listening to experts, but not listening to experts, knowing when to listen and knowing when to ignore. And that's been applicable in my Zen practice, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, at Harvard, they wanted to, put me on hardcore chemo. I was nervous about this. I'd seen some things online about some softer stuff that, might really work. And I found an oncologist at MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, in one of his research papers. You have to do all this research yourself. It's given me a whole new appreciation of being a doctor and how hard it is to be a patient. Because you have to advocate for yourself. The doctors are so busy that they do what they know. And the guys at Harvard knew chemotherapy, and that way the conversation ended. But I didn't want to just go with that because these are toxic things. So I emailed this Dr. Ravi in Houston. I'm just getting choked up just thinking about how fortunate I am that this man had the compassion. Think about this. You get a random email from a patient in New York State. I have this cancer. I can remember exactly where I was. I was driving my daughter to Hochstein for a cello lesson, and the phone rings through the car, and it's Dr. Ravi at 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, calling me and saying, I want to talk to you about your cancer. And I'm fully convinced if he had not called me, I would not be here right now, because I would have done the chemo at Boston that I'm sure there's no way I would be still alive here 11 years later with that. Because it doesn't cure this disease. It just kind of keeps it at bay a little bit, but then it weakens your immune system. And Dr. Ravi had the wisdom to say, let's just do some gentle stuff and watch and wait and be patient. You don't have to do anything. Just sit there. He didn't say that. That's my little Zen tweak. So I hadn't come to Zen yet. I was still, desperately trying not to die. Obviously very depressed, can't work. And because, and even Dr. Ravi says, I have no cure for you. So, I pull out. I was always, as far as most traditional doctors go, I was always quite open to, quote, alternative medicine. So I sought out acupuncture. And I remembered in medical school, there was an emergency room doctor, of all things, an emergency room, the last person you would think, an emergency room doctor who was a nice guy. Of course, he was Canadian. and he used to do Qigong on people in the emergency room, right? So in one room, he'd be doing CPR and giving epinephrine. In the other room, somebody was having a migraine, he'd be giving them Qigong. And you know, he popped into my head. I hadn't seen him since in probably 10, 15 years since I was in training. But again, the way these puzzles come together is just mind-blowing. So I remembered him, and I sought him out, and it turns out he left traditional medicine completely and set up an acupuncture, Chinese herbal practice in Pittsford. So I started going to him and getting acupuncture 3 times a week and taking the herbs, and he had me doing the kind of Qigong exercises myself, and that's, you know, started to get into the meditation realm, and that, you know, he was having me visualize things, and I said, I guess I really need to learn more about meditation. And then again, here's where all the weird, you know, the 1,000 coincidences that bring us here. So when I was, you know, a seriously competitive squash player, you know, you get hurt, and a friend of mine sent me to a massage therapist, and I'd hurt my back, and the massage therapist says, you really got to start doing yoga. I says, well, I don't know anything about yoga. Where do I go for yoga? And she said, go to this place called Open Sky. So this was, I don't know, 5 or 7 years probably before my diagnosis. I went out back there and went to Open Sky for, I don't know, a year and a half or so, did yoga. And I remember Francois used to make jokes about he did it very lovingly, you know, the crazy people that sit and stare at the walls in the building next door. I just, that went in one ear and out the other, and obviously it must have stayed in the brain, because when I thought about where can I meditate, that yoga said, oh, there's that Zen center next to the yoga place. I'll call up the Zen center. So yeah, back injury, massage therapist, yoga teacher, cancer, here I am. Giving a talk 11 years later. So really, again, in some ways, and you've heard this from other people here, these seeming catastrophes that happen to us are blessings. Truman, what's our time ending? 10:20?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so you know, when the catastrophes become blessings, you know, I had no choice but to practice. You know, it's hard. A lot of, you know, I see new faces here I've never seen before. There's a lot of people that are, you know, coming to Zen out of the pandemic and trying it out. And it's hard. It's a difficult. You know, as we say on the websites, it's simple but not easy. But for me, I had no choice. I have a as Deborah Zaretsky likes to say, the sword of Damocles, you know, hanging over me. So yeah, the motivation, you know, was forced upon me. I mean, I suppose I could have turned to drugs or alcohol, but fortunately, I didn't. You know, I tried to escape, of course. But this disease that I have is, you know, there is no escape. Whose book is that? The Wisdom of No Escape. Somebody's got a book of that. Pema Chodron, right? Yeah. I think I read it. So yeah, you know, I'm here. Not to say I didn't fight it a lot. I remember my early times coming here. I would wait almost until that third bell was struck to run to my seat so I could I could avoid sitting on that mat as long as possible. Because when when you've been given this diagnosis and then you're staring at a wall with nothing to distract you, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough not to think. But I had no choice, so I persevered. And slowly, it got easier. The tumors kept growing. Obviously a source of anxiety. They grew for the first 3 years after I was diagnosed. They were still growing. I'm still kind of declining. I would work part-time. Then I got some radiation treatment, which seemed to stop them from growing. So that, it's given me some breathing room, made it a little bit easier to sit. That maybe the end is not so near. So, staying on the path. I plugged along for those first bunch of years and had some great experiences in Sesshin, which reaffirmed my faith in the practice. Again, I was lucky that I had such a powerful motivating force to get me into the room, because once I did, then you start having some experiences that reaffirm for you that this really does work. I have yet to find something that I have been taught here that is not true. So then the next catastrophe happened in my life, more the life of this other family than me. But just about 4 years ago, January, we had some new neighbors over for a dinner party. Welcome to the neighborhood. With their two daughters, one of them a young baby. And the next day, she was dead. And it turns out she ingested a pill that was on the floor of my house that my mother had dropped. An unspeakable tragedy. And any parent that's lost a child, which I have not, I can only imagine and to know the suffering that they're going through. So this was a setback. The anxiety for me, when this was discovered, there was a big police investigation. Our house was searched. We had to get a lawyer. It's in the newspaper. This is the reason I mentioned as a kid that I never got in trouble. I was so afraid of getting into trouble as a kid. I don't know why, but I was. And now this. The anxiety was unbearable. Not sleeping for, weeks at a time led me to, I had, despite the cancer diagnosis, I had never taken any anxiety medicine, any antidepressants. Zen was my medicine. And here I had to take something. And the first dose of one of these SSRIs that I took, 15 hours later, I was acutely suicidal. We stopped that medicine, obviously. But the 2 months of sleep deprivation and anxiety and just the existential angst of the loss and the suffering of our neighbors, on top of my ongoing illness, I just spiraled down into this horrible, horrible depression. And again, no medicines didn't really help. I went to the psychiatrists, therapists, I was on 3 different antidepressants at the same time, and it's still suicidal. I never did it. I never acted on it. But I had a hole in my chest, right here, center of my chest that I'd never had my entire life. I describe it like a black hole. Just all joy, everything just sucked into my chest. So now I was on a new search. How do I deal with this? And this is where staying on the path really hit home for me, because Zen just wasn't. I had a crisis of faith. I'm like, I've been meditating hard for 7 years before this happened, and it was like, it felt useless. It felt like the practice had completely abandoned me. Total panic, mental health, never worse. I started shopping around went to the Tibetans for a bit. I never left here completely, but I was shopping around for other practices. I couldn't just sit and stare at that wall. I needed guided meditations. I wanted something to help me. I did gratitude meditations. I wrote gratitude lists. I, did all the things, and everything was an empty exercise. All of them were intellectual exercises. So I had to search again on my own. I found psychedelic psychotherapy, did a different number of treatments there. I kept doing Zen. I did other stuff too, a lot of the guided stuff. I even sat through the sessions, the virtual sessions during the pandemic. Right? So, yeah, talk about a bad timing, right? You're already suicidal and then the pandemic hits. My last daughter went off to college. So we had empty nest, pandemic. It was rough, really rough. So sitting in sesshin by myself in my walkout apartment in my parents' house I'd go to, so I could have the whole place to myself, with this hole in my chest. And I hated Zen at that time. I don't know why I kept doing it. I just did. I guess I had no choice. I don't know what else to say. I just kept doing it. And I got angry. I was so angry at Roshi. How can you let me sit here with this hole in my chest not wanting to live? This can't be right. And the reason I mentioned my obedience and my non-rebelliousness as a kid was my next act of rebellion was to stop sitting every day. Whoa, crazy. But you hear the message, sit every day, sit every day, sit every day. And I did. I was obedient. I did. I sat every day for like 7-8 years. I'm like, I have a hole in my chest. I do not want to live. This cannot be good for me to sit here and think about this. Of course it's not. Roshi's not telling me to think about it. Of course he's telling me not to think about it. Do your practice. So I finally, gave him the virtual finger and stopped sitting. Well, that lasted about, a week. 2 weeks, maybe. And then I was back there. But just doing it made it different. Just making the decision that I was going to take charge of my practice. And that's what I've been learning about this combination of listen to experts and listen to yourself. I had to listen to myself when it came to my medical care, But at the same time, you know the old saying, a doctor who treats himself as a fool for a patient. So yeah, same thing in my Zen practice. Listen to the experts, listen to myself. So I persevered, resilience, just keep sitting. Ketamine seemed to be the bomb for me. That kind of, it's impossible to know what got me through all this. I will certainly say that sitting through all of that and directly experiencing a hole in my chest, I completely believe that it did help me get through it. We say this all the time, the only way out is through. You can't avoid it. All I wanted to do was avoid it, but you can't. So some combination of ketamine and all those sesshin, it improved. And I've been off all antidepressants for 1.5 years. My mental health has never been better. And sesshin, about 15 months ago, I'm such a planner and the linear person that it's so hard for me not to go into sesshin with expectations, and we all struggle with this to an extent. But every time something good happens in sesshin, it's out of the blue, and it's unplanned. And I'm in that November sesshin, and I'm just struggling. And even this last Rohatsu, every sesshin, I still hate it at some times. And I'm never doing this again. I can't do that. I'm not coming back here. Why am I here? I mean, how many have I been to? And I still do this. So I was in one of these temper tantrums in this November sesshin, and I'm like, why am I struggling so much? Just relax. And I took some relaxation breaths that how many times have I done that in 10 years of practice? But there was something different about these that I tell people it changed my DNA. It was that profound. And the next thing that followed was stop beating yourself up. I had been so hard on myself my whole life. And I'm not going to say it's been 100% cured. I still have my moments. But it was transformative. And it may not be, is not a Kensho type experience, but for me, enlightenment, I saw things about myself. That's enlightenment to me. And my burden is lighter. And what more can you ask for than a lighter burden with this life that we all live? And I know you all have burdens too. Anybody here could come up here and give a talk like this. So I'm going to end with some poetry. Because now I like questions more than answers. And that's another thing that's changed with 10 years of this practice. So I got to go with Rumi, of course. Out beyond right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you all there. I'll stop now and take questions.
So I'm sure Jisai has the this mic on, so just a couple things about, so Jonathan, when someone in here asks a question, repeat the question so people online can hear it. And for people online, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, put it in the chat box, send it to everyone. I've got a device here, I can read it out. And with that,
Jonathan, thank you. My question is fake. And thanks to Dr. Robbie, I'm so glad he was there. And for you being, just talking to yourself. And we're all you. Just, yes, Sensei said, thank you.
I can relate to the hole in the chest.
Hang in
Probably
there.
why it's it.
Yeah.
There's
No.
something in there.
Yeah.
Has it come out the other side yet? Thank you. The honesty.
Where do I get the special K?
Method guided.
My mom's a Leo-Meyer sarcoma survivor, so I've seen through her how difficult it is to live with vascular cancer. She doesn't have Zen, but she's a deacon in a church, and I think that's really given her strength.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I have a question. I'm just curious. Jonathan and I have become really good friends, but we haven't spoken about one part of your talk that you mentioned today, and I was just curious, like the part of your story about the trauma when you were born. Do you how is that something that came into your consciousness when the tragedy happened in your house? Or is that something that you already thought about before?
No. Oh, yes. Thanks, Truman. The question from Rachel was the birth trauma with the cord around my neck. Is that something that I had thought about before? Or did that just come to me with the death of the baby at the house? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, time-wise, it didn't come to me until after the baby had died, but I don't know that it was directly related. Obviously, the things that are buried deep in our subconscious are powerful. I'll, at the risk of putting everyone into tears right before we leave, I'll relate a different version of that did relate to Maisie. During one of my psychedelic psychotherapy sessions, you prepare, you set an intention, and there's this, you make the setting for what you want to achieve. And I had put photos on the wall of me, because again, being the planner that I am and trying to make something happen, I was going to regress myself psychologically and go back in time. So I had photos of me, college, high school, middle school, elementary school, me as a baby. Then I had photos of both sets of parents. Like I did like a family tree on the wall, grandparents. I had photos of everybody back as far as I could go. And the psychedelic session was going horribly. It was awful. And I went to the therapist. I'm like, I can't settle down. This isn't working. I was having another temper tantrum, like a Sesshin one. And I went to the photos, and I started taking down the photos. This is not working. Take down the photo of me in college, me in high school, me in my sailor outfit. And I get to me as a 9-month-old baby. I just lost it. I really had not been thinking about her in a long time. And it was there. And I cried. Grief that I've never experienced in my entire life. I felt that I was grieving for every parent that had ever lost a child in all of eternity. And again, it was another one of these things where what you think is a horrible experience turns out to be that was what I needed to heal, that loss. And that it really resolved it. So yeah, was the birth trauma part of that? I don't know. That was a lot more than you asked.
It seems to me in your talk that it wasn't any one thing. I mean, we talk about cause and effect. There should be causes and effects, I think, because there's so much. Some comes together, some of it falls apart. I guess this is what I'm experiencing in this practice, actually. And, so I'm even questioning cause and effect. I mean, that doesn't really exist. But at any rate, the way your talk went is just all these confluences coming together. I really appreciate that. Thank you. It's a lot of pain. It's dukkha, damn it. But I've gone through a lot of some of that stuff. I remember one session I cried. Oh gosh, that was memory. Take a breath. I cried for a whole round, even through Kenya. And afterwards, I felt like 1,000 pounds just gone.
Yeah.
More than that. So, but there's still a lot of grief in me. So, I think that's the whole. What it is what it is. Be with it as best I can.
Okay, we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk to Jonathan after. Give him a hug if he needs one, or if we need one, and with that, we'll recite the 4 vows.